good morning to you all. I'm indeed delighted to be before you. Well, I see that we have a lot of visitors today, and we want to welcome you. Our topic for today is, can good come from adversity? Can good come from adversity? Adversity is a state of misfortune. It could be tragedy or affliction. It is that period of distress or hardship or exposure to unfortunate or calamitous events that we at times experience in our lives. When we experience adversity or challenges, we often become discouraged. Sometimes we grow weak in our faith and even question our standing with our God. Adversity can be our greatest motivation for spiritual growth, or it can be a deadly path to discouragement and despair. And Scripture tells us in Romans chapter 8 and verse number 28, all things work together for good, to them that love God, to them that are called according to His purpose. We are very much familiar with this text, very much familiar with this passage, but still we ask, can we see good in prolonged periods of unemployment? Can we see good in financial challenges? Is there good in losing of homes and of cars and personal property? We see no good in inability to make ends meet. We see no good in a diagnosis of cancer or some other catastrophic illness. We see no good in unfair treatment on the job. There's no good in our eyes in persecution or in us experiencing a series of unfortunate events. Yet the Scripture tells us that all things work together for good to them that love God and those who are called according to His purpose. As people of faith, we must receive God's word and we must believe His promise. And we must believe that He will deliver on the things that He said that He will do for us. Jesus tells us in John chapter 16 and verse number 33, He says, in this world you will have trouble. He says, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Yes, trouble will come, but He's telling us that we need not despair, because Jesus is our example in overcoming troubles and adversities in this world. And so we ought to take heart, because with God's help we are more than conquerors. Peter tells us that as Christians that we will face hostility, that we will face ill treatment, that we will face oppression, and we will face all of these adversities because of our stand in Christ. But listen to what he says in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse number 12 to 13. He says, dear friends, he says, do not be surprised. Do not be surprised at the fiery ordeals that has come upon you to test you. It says, as though something strange were happening to you. He says instead, but rejoice in so much as you participate in the suffering of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when His glory is revealed. He's saying there's going to come a time when we will be overjoyed. And so yes, struggles and hardships and sufferings will come. But we ought not to be surprised, because we are being forewarned of these things. James continues on and he tells us of the kind of attitude that we as people of God ought to cultivate towards trials and adversities. He says in James chapter 1 and verse number 2 and 3, he says, consider it pure joy. Not just joy. He says, consider it pure joy. My brothers and sisters, whenever you face many trials, he says, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. He encourages us, he says, let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature, complete, and not lacking anything. There is a purpose in trials. There is a purpose in adversities. Perseverance is the persistence and patience that we develop in doing something despite the difficulty or the delay that we experience in achieving success. I want us to understand what perseverance is, because he's saying that this is the fruit that these things should produce in our lives. And we must be able to understand and to identify the fruit of perseverance in our lives. It is the persistence, it is the patience that we develop in doing something despite the difficulty or delay we experience in achieving the success. It is pressing on, it is continuing on in spite of the obstacles that may come and may be in our way. Can good come from adversity? In Jeremiah chapter 32 and verse number 27, God on this occasion reminded his servant that he is God and there is nothing whatsoever that is impossible or too hard for him to do. And God had to tell him and to remind him, says, behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. And he asked him, is there anything too hard for me? And we need to reflect upon that. And we need to ask ourselves, is there anything too hard for our God? God can use adversity in the lives of the faithful. And he could turn that adversity into opportunities for spiritual growth. And so I ask you today, is there anything too hard in your life for God to address? No, if we're honest, there is nothing too hard for God to do for us. He has experience. You know, when we look for work, when we look for job, people ask for experience. God has experience in using less than favorable events and producing beneficial results. He has experience in the area of difficulties. Consider salt, that table salt that many of us use with our meals. We're told that salt is made up of two elements, sodium and chloride comes from chlorine. Now, naturally occurring sodium and chlorine are both harmful for human consumption and even for handling. The sodium requires great care when being handled, because if it comes in contact with water, there's a reaction and it can become flammable. Sodium is so volatile that it has potential, if exposed to air or oxygen, to explode. Chlorine is an extremely caustic or dangerous substance. We know chlorine, we call it bleach. We use it for cleaning. We know that there's some in this world that express chlorine as a gas, and they use it as weapons of war that result in death. But God, our God, can combine these two elements, these dangerous elements, and he can produce salt, which is beneficial to us. Isn't this a good God that we serve? God can take these elements that exist in nature, chlorine and sodium, which are adverse to us, and he can rearrange the atomic structure of these and give us salt which is useful for us. God has experience in dealing with adversity and producing a beneficial result. If he can do it in nature, surely he can do it in our lives. God is in control. Even when we feel that our lives are out of control, he is in control, and we ought to remember that. There is nothing whatsoever too hard for our God. Sometimes when we look around, we see the wicked among us. We see them going along and they see are unaffected adversity. Everything seems to be breaking right for them. There's nothing that goes wrong in their lives, it appears. Notwithstanding the fact that they live as enemies of the cross of Christ, prosperity, advancement, the positions of authority, all these good things appear to come to them. They appear to be doing better than we are. And sometimes these people, they oppress us, they persecute us, they mash us up. And we may find these events perplexing, but we ought to remember that even in this, God is still on the throne. And our God is not blind and he's not deaf. He knows how to deal with the wicked. He knows. Proverbs 16 and verse number 4 says, it tells us that God makes everything goes as he pleases. In this world, God is in control and he makes everything goes as he pleases. He has even prepared a day of disaster for evil people. And so we ought not to despair in adversity, because God is indeed in control. He makes everything goes as he pleases. And so we ought not to fret over the wicked. They may appear to be doing well now. They may be advancing now. But God has designed a day of destruction for the wicked. And we have an excellent example of this, particularly in the book of Esther, particularly in the 5th chapter of the book of Esther. And in this book, we are introduced to Haman, an evil and a wicked man, a man who everything seemed to be breaking right for. He appears to be, everything was going right for him professionally. He is moving up the professional ladder. Things could not have been any better in the life of this man. And he oppressed the people of God. And he sought to utterly destroy God's people. And because of this man Haman, the people of God are greatly troubled. And they are placed in the midst of adversity. And I want you to understand this, and I want to give you a brief background of this book of Esther. And the book of Esther begins with Queen Vashti snubbing her husband, King Ahasuerus. And she did it in front of others by refusing to come when he summoned her. And naturally he was displeased with her action, and her action embarrassed the king. And he sought advice from his counselors. And the advice he received led him to conclude that he must remove her as his queen. And so they embarked upon an extensive search for a significant period of time to find this just perfect young woman to be appointed queen. And through the providence of God, Esther, a beautiful young Jewish woman, was selected by this pagan king. Not a nation of people of God, but a pagan king. He selected her through the providence of God to be his queen. Esther was an orphan. She was raised by her cousin Mordecai. And he encouraged her, he pressed her, he pushed her to go into audition for this role as queen. And in time we are told that Mordecai, because I guess he was a busybody, he learned of a plot to kill the king. And he didn't sit on that information, he reported that information. And it resulted in the king's life being saved. He was not rewarded. He did not receive any accolades or reward at that time. And no doubt he was discouraged. I did good and nobody looked at it. And sometimes we get like that. We do well and we receive no reward. But God is in control. God knows what he is doing. And all was not well in the king's court. When Mordecai refused to bow down to the king's evil counselor Haman, as he met him in the street, Haman was a prideful man. It was like a lot of people we have in our society today. A deeply prideful, wicked, and evil man. And Haman was deeply offended, and he devised a plot that I got to get rid of this fellow who ain't bowing to me. And he was so evil and so wicked that he said, not only Mordecai, but I can kill all of them Jews. All of the Jews in the Persian Empire. And Haman went to the king, and he essentially said to the king, look here, my brother, I want you to agree with me, we can kill these Jews. And the king was persuaded to go along with his plan to kill Mordecai and all the Jews in the Persian Empire. The king didn't understand, and he did not know at the time that his beloved Queen Esther was a Jew, because she was keeping it a secret. And with this threat against Mordecai and against the Jewish people, Mordecai went to Esther And he asks her for help. He asks her, look here, you got to go before your husband and tell your husband to ease up. And he goes outside the gate and he wails and he wears sackcloth. He's afraid, and the people are afraid because they know that their death warrant had been signed. And in the face of this threat, and as well as being pressured to go before the king to plead for her people, Esther fasted for 3 days before she even thought about going before the king. Esther was worried that, look here, I know that they said they can kill all the Jews, but if I go before him, based on the laws of the land, and he ain't summoned me, he ain't deal with me right now. I'm not going to even have a chance to see the outcome of this warrant of execution that was issued on the Jews. And Esther, through the providence of God, Esther fasted, and she, along with the people, fasted. And through providence of God, God softened the heart of the king, and when she appeared in this court, he was pleased to see her, and he summoned her forth. And he asked him, he probably forgot about her because, he probably got so much wives, he forgot about that one. And he just remembered the treasure that he had, and he said, look here, man, I'll do anything for you. What you want? And Esther, a shrewd woman, a wise woman, said, look here, man, let's have a banquet, and I want you to invite Haman. Meanwhile, Haman is excited because he was going to massacre the people of God. But he had that banquet. Haman attended. And Esther didn't approach the king and tell the king exactly what she wanted. She said again, what you want? He said, man, let's have a next banquet. I don't want you again to have Haman come. Now, this time, Haman, the prideful man, feels like he's a big man, that look at the king and the queen having this banquet and they making me this guest of honor. But God is in control. God knows how to help his people in adversity. The king went to his bed and he just could not sleep. Sleep could not come to his eyes. And he got up out of his bed and he asked for his readers to come, and they read from the books. And they read that section of the book, and all of the books that they had, they just landed on that section of the book that talked about this man Mordecai and how he revealed the plot of those who wanted to kill the king. And the king said, oh yeah, that's Mordecai. What did we do for him? We ain't do nothing for him. Remember now, Mordecai would have felt slighted, no doubt. In God's time, wait on God. And the king said, you know something? When Haman come, I can ask Haman. He knows how to honor people. Haman trying to kill Mordecai now. And then Haman came, and with his chest out the next morning, they said, the king, look, I want to escalate this time frame to get rid of these people. The king said to him, listen here, my brother, what should be done to a man who served the king well? Haman, being prideful, said to the king, well, king, thinking it was him. The king can't be honoring nobody other than him. He said, well, look here, king, if it was me, I will do X, Y, and Z. King said, man, make it happen. But I want you to direct that towards Mordecai. Now, that crushes spirit. And so Haman had to take and go and drag him, lead him around and bestow all those honors that he said should happen to the man who served the king right. You see how karma is? Or you see how the promise of God, we say karma in this world, but it's the promise of God. A bad situation, but an extremely good God. And so Haman attended this second banquet, and the king says to Esther, Esther, man, what you want me to do? She said, you see that man there, Haman? I want you to fix him up. He trying to kill me, and he trying to kill all of my people. And Haman, prompted by his wife, had erected this huge gallows. A gallows that was too big for the job that he wanted to do. And that same gallows that he erected, it's the same gallows they used to kill him on. We usually say when you dig one ditch, dig two. and the people of God was delivered. God is a good God. God knows how to deliver his people. In this story, we see that God allows the paths of evil and adversity to intersect. And he did it for his own honor and his glory, and that his name may be glorified among his people. And so the question is, why does God allow adversities to visit upon us? And there are a number of reasons why adversity comes to our lives. And it comes to us because God knows that there is value that can accrue to us from adversity. And I want us to discuss 3 reasons today why adversity comes to our lives. And I want to suggest to you the first reason is to produce patience in us. And secondly, I want us to talk about that it can assist us in growing spiritually. And thirdly, I want us to look at the fact that it can help us to learn to trust in God. And so we say that adversity comes to us because it can produce patience. In Esther chapter 5 and verse number 1, it says, and it happened on the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal clothing and stood in the court of the king's house, across from the king's house. And the king sat on his royal throne, and in the royal house across the gate of the house. And it happened when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, she received favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter in his hand. And Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What do you desire, Queen Esther? What is your wish? It shall be unto you, it shall be given unto you." Watch this now. Up to half of the kingdom. Esther could have said, "King, notwithstanding what you may hear later on, let me live and give me the half." Esther stayed focused. And in verse number 4, Esther answered, "If it is good to the king, let the king Haman come today to a banquet which I have prepared for him." And the king said, "Cause Haman to hurry, so that he may do as Esther said." And the king and Haman came to the banquet which Esther prepared. And the king said to Esther at the banquet of wine, "What is your petition? That it shall be granted to you. What is your request?" This man, God so softened his heart, so prepared his heart that he just couldn't contain himself. He just wanted to know what he could do for her. He said, "It shall be performed even unto 1/2 of the kingdom." And Esther answered and said, "My petition, my request, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to my banquet, which I shall prepare for them, and will do tomorrow as the king has said." So this is the second banquet she is asking for. And sometimes God allows adversity in our lives to produce patience in us. We notice in the very first verse of this chapter, it said that it happened on the 3rd day that Esther made her approach to the king. The 3rd day. That suggests us that there was a delay. And in chapter 4, we see that there was a delay. But why delay, given the urgency of this situation? Why not just rush out and do this thing, approach the king? The Jews were under a sentence of death. Yet we see this pause, this forestalling of action. And they did it to fast. And they decided that it would be best for them to fast before approaching the king. And see, before Esther did this very important thing, she asked them to fast. And look in Esther chapter 4. You'll see this in verse number 16. Then Esther sent a message to Mordecai. In verse number 16 it says, "Go gather all the Jews who are at Susha and fast for me." She said, "Do not eat or drink for 3 days. or 3 nights or day, for 3 days and night. And it says, and I and my attendants will fast also. And when this is done, after the 3 days of fasting, she says, I will then go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. And Mordecai went away and he carried out Esther's instructions, and they went into this fast. So in chapter 5, we see it is the day after the fast. And Esther and the Jews, they spend 3 days in a fast. And most likely, the scripture doesn't say this though, but most likely they were praying. And there is a period of delay before she went into the king. And why would they delay? Why was it necessary for them to fast? What then was the purpose of this fasting? Could it be that they wanted to get behind God? They wanted to make sure firm of their faith in God. It's important for us to understand that the word God or faith or prayer is not mentioned in this book. But what else would they be doing when they're fasting? No doubt they would have prayed and made their voices heard before God. They were fasting because they were deep concerned and their hearts were heavy. And so they determined that it would be best, that this matter was so important, that it would be best for them to set aside everything else in their lives and to focus on God and focus on fasting. Even set aside eating and drinking and to devote that time towards God. Essentially saying to God, God, you have to come true for us. Because this situation is so grave, we just do not know what to do. I'm sure that's what they were saying in their hearts. No doubt they were saying, God, we need your direction in this matter. We're asking Esther to go before her husband the king. You know the situation between Esther and her husband. You know she's a Jew and he's a Persian. You know that she is not being summoned, and we are asking, Lord, that you have favor upon her, that he will look favorably upon her, and that he will grant her request. No doubt that was their prayer. Their hearts may have been so heavy they may not have known what to pray. They may have just simply cried out, God, you know. And sometimes that's how we are. Esther was asked to go into the king. And she said, that God comes out in this text that she would not have seen the king for some 30 days up to this point. They're not like our marriages were all a day. 30 days is a short period of time. She didn't see her husband. And she had to wait till he called her. For her to go and think she was presumptuous enough to go into him and say, listen here, my boy, you ain't called me. That's a death sentence. And so this was a frightening situation for Esther on two fronts. Firstly, she was told, or she knew that she was going to die. And you know, we like to try to prolong death as long as possible, eh? And they were asking her to do something that could result in her dying before them. And so she was greatly troubled. This was an enormous burden that was placed upon Esther. The fate of her people was upon her. And she thought it best that, listen, before we embark upon this, let's wait. Let's not rush into this. Let's be patient. Let's wait. Let's fast. Let's fast for 3 days. And I think sometimes we may think of fasting as some kind of hunger strike that we could force God or make God feel sorry for us. Fasting has more to do for us than it does for God. We can't twist God's hand. But when we fast and we're sincere, the change occurs in us, it focuses us, it changes our hearts. And it helps us to place our focus, a more laser focus on our God. Fasting strips away the desires that we have and our dependence on those basic necessities to survive. Because we deprive ourselves of those things, so the eating and the drinking. And the point of it is that the only thing that we will take in into ourselves is this focus on our God. And so they place their eyes upon their God. And so the question is, what would they have been doing in these 3 days besides just not eating and not drinking? No doubt crying out to God. This was not just waiting. This was not idle waiting. This was waiting with a purpose in mind and with a desired outcome in their hearts. And so Esther needed courage. She was afraid to go to her king and to admit to her husband, I deceived you, I didn't know of it, I never told you that I was a member of this Jewish nation. This was an awkward situation for her. She hid her identity from her husband. And the very nation of people that he decided he was going to kill, she was going to say to him, look, I'm one of these people that Haman persuaded you to exterminate. I'm asking you to have mercy not only on me, but upon my people. This was a difficult task that she had upon her. And so Esther, no doubt, was waiting for direction. She was waiting for courage. She was waiting for God to strengthen her. And we see her exercising patience so that she could receive the strength and the courage that she needed from her God. She resisted the temptation just to rush and do those things that she was being asked to do. And sometimes adversity leads us to recognize that patience is indeed a virtue that we need to exercise. And patience is sometimes one of the hardest things for us to learn to do. You know, when we pray to God, we ask God for something, we understand, and we usually say yes. God says yes, He says no, but sometimes He says wait, and we as a people, we don't like to wait. Either tell me yes or no, but we don't want to hear wait. And lots of times, sometimes we are told that we ought to wait. So sometimes trials and adversities and challenges, they enter our life and they try our faith, and they test us to lead us to develop that virtue of patience. James tells us in James chapter 1, verse number 2, verse number 1, number 2 through 4. He says, my brothers, count it all joy when you fall into different kinds of temptation, knowing that the trying of your faith works patience. He says, but let patience have its perfect work, so that you may be perfect and entire, lacking nothing. And one of the ways that God uses to cultivate patience in us is to expose us to adversity, to periods of testing, so that we can learn to come to trust in God. The second reason I said that I want to discuss is sometimes adversity is in our lives so that we can grow. In James 1 and verse number 4, it says, let patience have its perfect work. And for the end it says, so that you may be perfect and entire, lacking nothing. That's the product, that's the end result. To get us to the point where we are spiritually grown up, perfect and entire, lacking nothing. And so the trying of our faith works patience. The different kinds of temptations and or the variety of trials that we have in our life exercises our faith. Think about it. When we exercise physically, don't we not get in shape? When we exercise our faith, we get in shape. We get our faith in shape. And so when our faith is worked, it grows and it develops. Just as the weightlifter who takes the dumbbell and keep doing his curls. And if you keep curling on one arm, you'll have one big arm and one small arm. But if you work out that muscle, it is going to grow. So when our faith is worked, it develops and it grows. That's why adversity comes. It comes that we must learn to trust in God and to wait on God. Adversity takes us to the point where we recognize that we will not make it. Sometimes it takes us to that far. Sometimes it takes us to the point where we know that we will not be able to stand unless God prop us up. And this was what was in the heart of Esther, it appears. And this is why she said, look, see, what you are asking me to do is an extremely difficult thing for me to do. We need to pause, we need to take some time, and we need to focus on God. We need to ask God to help and prepare us to do these things, or to prepare me to do these things. So what do you think Esther was doing in those 3 days? Esther was growing spiritually. Esther knew that she was ill-equipped to do what they were asking her to do. She knew that she did not have in her those things, those qualities, that courage to do what they were asking her to do. She knew that she needed God's help to be able to stand before her husband, the king, and to declare the things that she needed to declare before him. She needed wisdom. And no doubt she was asking God for these things. And she asked the entire nation to help her by fasting and focusing on the task that she was asked to do. And at the end, Esther knew that at the end, if God would deliver her, if God would answer her prayers and the prayers of the people, then she truly would be able to say, look here, I am going to do what God wants me to do. And if I die, I die. You see, something happened to Esther during those 3 days. She got courage. She got the courage to go ahead, to move ahead, and to do what they were asking her to do. And no doubt fasting helped the people, because denying themselves of food and water or drink focused them on God. And so they drew nearer to their God. So adversity worked wonders in the life of these people. God used that evil, that wicked man, Haman, to bring his people to a greater level of spirituality. And so in fasting, they're saying, I'm setting aside my essential need for food and for drink. Because what I want and what I need from God is even more important than food and drink. And so God allows adversity in this world so that we can grow. My final point is closely related to that second point. Sometimes God allows adversity in our lives so that we can learn to trust Him more. And perhaps this is the most important reason for adversity in our lives, that we may learn to trust God more. So that we would learn that when we have a problem, the place to turn is to God, not for us to sit and to try to figure these things out, not for us to lay upon our bed and to wear out the fabric on our pillow, twisting and turning on our beds, but to instead trust in God. Often when we are at ease, when things are going well in our lives, when there are no problems, there are no challenges, many of us are not minded to pray because everything's good. So sometimes adversity visits us, and it forces us to focus on God, to pray to God, to talk to God. And so the presence of adversity forced Esther and Mordecai and the Jews to turn to God, and they turned to God in a fast initially. And they were essentially admitting that they needed to trust God. They needed God's counsel, they needed His advice, they needed His help. They needed Him to act in this situation. And so no doubt their hearts were saying to God, God, this matter is entirely in your hand. Whether we stand or whether we die, it is entirely up to you. But God is a good God. God is a God who strengthens those who ask. In Isaiah chapter 14, verse number 28, it says, have you not known? Have you not heard that the everlasting God, Jehovah, the creator of the ends and earth, He does not grow weak or weary. God, it don't get tired like how we get tired. There's no searching of His understanding. In verse number 29 says, He gives power to the weary. God strengthens those who are weak and tired. And to him that has no vigor, you lack a little vigor, you ain't got no spunk, God gives you strength. God gives you some spunk. He increases our strength. Even to those who are young and by virtue of their age, they should be strong. He says in verse number 30, says, even the young shall faint and grow weary, but the young man shall utterly fall. It says, but to those who wait on Jehovah, those who wait on God, those who turn to God, he says, he shall renew their strength. It says, they shall mount up with wings as eagles, and they shall run and not grow weary, and they shall walk and they shall not faint. He's saying, if you put your trust, your hope in God, God got your back. God is not going to allow adversity to destroy you. God is not going to allow adversity to mash you up. We need to learn to trust God, to know that God has the answers for us. And as I conclude, the scripture tells us, as long as we are in this world, adversities, troubles, trials, tribulations, calamities, they will come. But as Jesus said in John chapter 16 and verse number 33, say, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. God doesn't want us to be distressed. He don't want us to be troubled. He said, we have been warned so that we can have peace. He says, in this world you will have trouble. He says, but take heart. I have overcome the world. God has lots of experience in dealing with adversities. He could deal with it in nature. He could deal with it in our lives. So as faithful Christians, we need not despair. God is there for us. And I know we may not have your back as individuals, but God has your back, and that's what is important. In Psalms 46 and verse number 1, he says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. David tells us again in Psalms 34 and verse number 17, when the righteous cry out for help, I want you to remember this now, when the righteous cry out for help, the Lord hears and rescues them from their troubles. If we have troubles and trials and we can't get no relief, it may be because we are not crying out for help. God knows how to rescue. God has experience. He knows how to rescue us, not from some troubles. But he says in this psalm, he says, God rescues them from all their troubles. No matter how severe, God is able. When I began to speak to you today, I asked, can good come from adversity? And I hope that you can answer yes. With God's help and with God's strength, good can indeed come from adversity. If you need prayers, we ask you to come. Listen to the Psalm of David. When the righteous cry for help, when the righteous, those who are standing right with God, when they cry for help, the Lord hears. Not only does he hear, he says, and rescues them from troubles. If you're in trouble, cry to God for help. He is waiting and he wants to rescue you from your troubles. If you do not know our God, that ain't for you. Just for people who know God. But God do not discriminate. He wants you to get to know him. And if you want to get to know God, we invite you to come also. And we will study with you. Help you to understand what God requires of you to become his servant. So that you can benefit from these things that we talked about today. So I invite you to stand as the song leader comes before us and lead us in song. And if you require prayers, I ask you to come as we stand and sing song 903.